This is what being woke is. Woke is actually a euphemism for an actual term called critical consciousness. It is the bastardization of Zion. The impulse that these people have is actually a righteous impulse. It's an impulse towards Zion, which is where there are no more poor among us, where we all live in unity and love with one another. That is the right impulse to have. But here's the problem. Zion emerges.
So what they go after first?
They go after Christianity, the family, education systems, universities, churches. Remember, cultural warfare is about identity. A religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture.
Dude, you make me so nervous, man. Well, okay, here's a list of topics. Jacob destroys Bill Real. Okay, you did. That's true. Queer polygamy is coming. I don't know how YouTube will ever allow that one. Benson was right about the commies. Okay, I think they might allow that one. How was Benson right about the commies? Hit it.
So, all right. I'm going to preface this a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of hyperbole in it.
Don't you back down right now, brother. Okay.
He was right in his essential thing that communist ideology was infiltrating the institutions of our country during his era and would continue to take over institutions within our country.
So are you justifying the blacklist of Hollywood and saying that all of that was A-okay?
Blacklist of I don't know what that is.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
You don't know what the blacklist of Hollywood was?
I don't know what that is.
When they put all the actors and all the writers on anyway, I'll tell you about it later. All I want to know is how was Benson right? Because that brother was a savage. Actually, it's kind of funny you mention it. Hold on, I got it in my book box here.
Get it out. Let's see it.
One of the actually right behind my golden statue made by a Korean artist in right after my golden false idol of Russell M. Nelson that was made by a really cool Korean street artist in front of the Man Chinese Theater. I've got different books that I've wanted to review and collect for a while, and it's really interesting. I've got a first edition of The Red Carpet by Ezra Taft Benson.
Oh.
What is The Red Carpet? Socialism, the Royal Road to Communism. Signed. It's a signed
It's actually signed by him?
Yeah, on eBay they had no idea who it was, I think.
Oh my god.
So I got a signed copy of The Red Carpet. And dude, before you say how he was right, look, whether he was right or wrong, this guy was a savage, dude. Let me read you a couple of these quotes. All right. I haven't been able to read the whole book yet. Like I said, it's still in the pre-production phase, shall we say, right? But this is the opening forward. No American has sounded the battle cry of freedom more diligently and sincerely and with less selfish motive than Ezra Taft Benson. He is prepared to champion the free way of life. Through many years of public service, 8 of them in the cabinet of the President of the United States of America, a profound understanding of and experience in the economics of the free enterprise system through a long service to agricultural and the rural peoples of America. It starts talking about he is, quote, I am for freedom against slavery, quote, I am for social progress and against socialism, and quote, I am for dynamic economy and against governmental ownership of the control of the means of production and distribution. I am for national security and against the appeasement and capitulation to an obvious enemy. And this was the kicker. This is the kicker right here, bro. He said, in this struggle, it is not enough to be right. We must put strength and action back of which that is right, says this champion of liberty. You know what I'm saying? Like,
boom.
It is not, okay, in this struggle, it is not enough to be right. We must put strength and action back of that which is right, says this champion of liberty. Like, this is so crazy. Like, could you imagine? He literally says, I sound a call to arms to the forces of freedom in the land he loves so dearly as a, quote, land choice above all other lands. This brother was like one step away from freaking, what are those Heartlander guys they're called, right? It's like, this was hardcore. And I kind of like it, dude, because it was like I love how he said, we must go up against an obvious enemy. So now here you are. What is this? When was this book made? In the 70s? In the 80s?
I would say 60s,
65.
I'd probably say.
63 maybe.
You think 63?
I'd say
65?
60s, but
Oh
I'm
no,
not sure.
1979. At least
wow.
At least this publishing of it. So it predates me. I wasn't even born yet. But no joke. He calls it the red carpet, socialism, the royal road to communism. So you say he was right about the commies.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, dude, it freaking...
So obviously there are going to be people, though, that are going to be like, oh, well, they can point to like certain things that he thought that maybe were true that weren't true. Fine. Okay, those are the details. But the reality is that his overarching message was that there are certain ideological currents out there within socialism that lead you down the road to communism, and Marxism is kind of the undergirding.
So all the boomers were right. You're saying all the boomers were right.
They were. Well, he was right about this. I'll tell you what, because the Marxist influence on today's culture is immense. And people, here's the thing, people just don't know because they don't understand history. They don't know the ideological history of these ideas that we see today.
Okay, but how do you say
really
that there's a large Marxist influence on society nowadays? I don't see any kids picketing to have the government take over the dairy. And, you know.
Well, that's because you don't understand the evolution of communist and Marxist thought. You have to understand that there is something deeper down below, like economic communism, that is actually the philosophical sort of underpinnings of that movement. And it's those underpinnings that I actually want to address. It is the thing upon which even Marxism is built, which actually, if we were to go really far back, it actually comes down to sort of a Hegelian, which all this stuff, I'm throwing a lot of...
What's Hegelian?
Hegelianism. Hegel was a particular philosopher that had the idea of the dialectic, and Anyway, I'm going to get really boring here if I go too deep into the
I just
details.
want to start learning these words, so next time I'm his elders quorum, I can sound smarter than I really am.
So, you guys can. I would recommend a guy who's been doing a lot of good work online on this is James Lindsay. He's been talking about the Hegelian sort of influence into Marxism and how Marxism morphed into cultural Marxism, which is basically what we're seeing today, more or less.
Now, I've heard Jordan Peterson talking about that. And if Jordan Peterson says it, it's got to be true.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
So I just want to really briefly kind of sketch some of the history, and you'll see how this leads to today. So Karl Marx's idea was, we all kind of know the basics of Karl Marx's thing. You have the haves, the have-nots, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, and he predicted that what would happen is that the economic conditions that existed for people in the Industrial Revolution, which were crappy, like go read Charles Dickens, go read Brigham Young, by the way, talked about how terrible the factory conditions were in England in the late 1800s. So there was a legit, like Marx wasn't addressing something that wasn't out there. Like he was looking at these people working to death in factories and saying, this isn't sustainable. The people are going to rise up because they'll eventually, the economic conditions will inevitably lead to them rising up in revolution, and basically, like, that's just what will happen naturally. Now, what happened is that all these communists were kind of like, because they kind of foresaw this is going to happen, and then there's going to be this sort of glorious future that emerges out of this, where the communist society will sort of emerge out of this
like
revolution
Glee in the 2010s. Yeah, okay. Keep going.
Exactly. Well, here's the problem. It didn't happen. When World War I happened, for instance, a lot of the communists thought that this was it, like the big revolution was going to happen. But they found that there was a problem, that people were like, they weren't loyal to their classes. They were loyal to their nations.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So nationalism was the big thread in World War I, where these nations, people were really patriotic to their nation. And so the communists kind of were like, well, this sucks. Like,
so we have to be national socialists instead of
that was another, that was you're right, it did lead into that, but this is what happens is there's this vision of society will break down the structures of economic power. And
by the way, for any of you listeners out there that don't know who the National Socialists were, they're modern Democrats. So keep going.
What emerged though is out of post World War I. And there started to become sort of these what's going on here? Why isn't the revolution happening? And people were asking that question. And one of the big theorists who began to explore this.
And when you say the revolution, you mean like the big worldwide uprising of the proletariat?
Of the proletariat. The workers were going to rise up against the people who owned the means of production, basically all the bosses, and they were going to take over the means of production, and then basically the people would be the owners of everything in a collective society. This is sort of the theory that Marx had. And the problem was it wasn't happening. And so the Marxists began to foment revolution. This is where, Lenin and the people in Russia and the Bolsheviks, they began to foment revolution. But the problem was then that started to go haywire because it didn't turn into a people's utopia. It started to really suck. And there also was a big conflict between those who believed in international socialism. Those are what we might call the Soviets. And then you had the National Socialists. Now, we all know who the National Socialists were. Those were the Nazis. And the International Socialists and the National Socialists hated each other's guts.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And that's why Hitler and Stalin, yes, had their conflicts amongst each other, was because they had different visions for the way that socialism was supposed to play out. And so while Hitler envisioned a nationalized socialism where socialism would happen within a nationalistic framework, the International Socialists, the communist movement more broadly, believed in an international vision for it. That was the big conflict that existed between them. And then, anyway, the point is this comes down to a guy, there's a really important philosopher that a lot of people don't know about.
Okay.
And this is a major and important point. It's a guy named Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci. It might be Gramsci or Gramsci. I'm not sure how you pronounce it within.
Okay. Hold on. Is it this cat? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I got a Wikipedia page.
The guy literally looks like a Muppet. Is it the guy that literally looks like a Muppet?
He kind of looks like a Muppet, but kind of like an evil Muppet. Here.
Okay, let me pull this up so the rest of the audience can see it. This guy literally looks like a Muppet. Like, look at this. He literally looks like a Muppet, bro. You know what I'm saying? So this cat is the one that caused all of our problems, bro?
So he's a major figure in this, and this is a thing everyone should know who he was and what he was about. His basic concept was this idea of cultural hegemony, which is a big word of saying, I guess we could say like cultural unity, or kind of a uniform culture that everyone subscribes to. Okay. And there's a problem. If you want people to rise up and have their premier loyalty to their class, right? Like we're the workers, and workers of the world, of every nation. We were all going to unite as workers, as our economic class. He found that doesn't work because people are not primarily loyal to their worker identity. They're loyal to the identity of their nation. And they're also loyal to the identity of their church and their family and all of these cultural institutions. And what he realized was the reason the revolution did not happen, the reason it didn't happen was because people weren't loyal to the revolution. They were loyal to their churches, to and to their nations and things like that. And there's this really great quote by Gramsci that I think, if you want to pull it up, that I think shows the way that he changed the dynamic of what people thought.
Is it this one that you sent in the Discord?
That's the one.
Oh, dude, read it out loud for those of us that are listening on the radio, man.
So he says, socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media, by transforming the consciousness of society.
This is so interesting because that's literally the interview that we just had with April Despain, talking about how pride, for lack of a better term, which is what she's going up against in Murray, Utah, has become just a straight up religion. And then here it is, the Marxists, over 150 years ago, calling for it to be a religion that replaces Christianity?
About 100 years ago, I'd say. But yeah, so remember what he's saying here is, look, if we want to have a revolution that changes society, if we want to transform society and move society into this higher plane of total equity, which is sort of the Marxist vision. Now, Marx was focused very much on the economic equity, but what happened was Antonio Gramsci had the idea that we need to actually change the culture. We need to, because the culture is what is preventing people, because they're primarily loyal not to their class, but to these other things. And so if you think about it, maybe even in today's term, the idea is you are no longer loyal to your identity as an American or as a Christian or as a Latter-day Saint. You're loyal to your identity. There are these new identity markers. Remember, cultural warfare is about identity. And that's what Gramsci understood. This is actually a very brilliant man. He's saying if we want to make people revolt against the established order of the society that we live in, which they thought was inherently oppressive, we need to have a revolution where people disengage from these other identity markers and attach themselves to class or other identity markers. Now,
so we need to get them off the drug of Christianity and onto our drug of cultural Marxism. So what they go after first?
They go after Christianity, the family, education systems, universities, churches, media, in order to, as he says, to transform the consciousness. This is an important term you have to understand. Consciousness in their mind is basically they're saying we need to change the way that people think about society, the way that people view society. This is what being woke is. Woke is actually a euphemism for an actual term called critical consciousness. It's the idea that you now view the world in terms of power dynamics between groups. And again, now you have the revolutionary way of seeing the world. Because they want to, because these old society, these old orders, the order of Christianity, the order of capitalism, the order of family structures, all of these things are inherently oppressive to human beings. Now, I'm not saying that Gramsci came up with all of this himself. It actually emerged later. So World War II happens, the National Socialists get their butt kicked, and so who's left? In the hard left
the
movement,
USSR,
which is the international socialists, which is why the international socialists were trying to inspire revolutions in countries throughout the world so that they would join in this great new world order of international socialism.
Oh,
okay. So that's the Great Cold War. That was who we're fighting. Like, my generation doesn't even know about this. And it's like,
so how does this have to do with us in 2023? Is this where the woke scolds came from?
Exactly. And I'll explain here. So what happened is after World War II, there was a particular group of intellectuals known as the Frankfurt School.
Oh, I've heard of these guys. So wasn't the one of them like big time pedophile?
No, you're thinking of some
College
of the
of
postmodernists that you're thinking
that
of.
money guy, right?
You're thinking of Foucault.
Oh yeah, he was down with all the bad stuff, man.
He was a postmodernist, but we'll talk about where the postmodernists come in. They come in much later in the story.
Okay, cool.
So
keep going.
What happens is that during World War II, there were a bunch of these Marxists that were living in Germany, and they were international Marxists. Well, that's a problem. You don't want to be an international Marxist living in a national socialist country.
Okay.
So they end up fleeing from Nazi Germany. A lot of them were Jews also, so that's a problem when you're living in Germany. And they actually went to New York. A lot of them.
New York?
New York City.
Made in New York City. Oh my gosh, that is such a freaking boomer Gen Xer joke right there. I just totally rocked that one. Okay, keep going.
You did fine.
So what happens is that they end up getting into places, into basically the Northeast academic system. And they are still Marxists, but they begin to look at sort of the whole Marxist project and say, hey, this isn't working. Like, the revolution isn't happening. And they end up really embracing Gramsci's sort of ideology, that this really ultimately, if we want to make change in society, it has to come through cultural revolution rather than through economic revolution. So they become what you might call cultural Marxists. Okay? This is where these
are the people who want to try and imprison Jordan Peterson up in Canada, right?
Exactly. This is
he's always talking about the cultural Marxists.
You're right. They're the neo-Marxists. The neo-Marxists are the people who basically followed Gramsci's idea that this ultimately is not about economics, like Marx said. This is actually about culture. And so what they did is they were obsessed. They came up with this idea called.
Well, actually, I would just like to point out that something Lance Christensen pointed out is that politics are always downstream from culture, and culture is always downstream from faith and beliefs. So I think it's very interesting that this guy right here literally says if we want to go Marxist, which is the politics downstream from culture, which is downstream from faith, we have to go after the faith. And he says socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity, much like, the invading Moors would have overwhelmed as Muslim raiders, the territories that they invaded in the Middle East in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries AD. So yeah, I'm fact checking in real time what you're saying here, and it's working out, man.
Well, what happens is that the neo-Marxists of the Frankfurt School, they really developed this idea known as critical theory. Okay, critical theory is another one that people, if you don't know what critical theory is, you need to learn what this is if you want to understand what's going on in the world.
Now, one last question though, before you finish into critical theory. So we've all heard of critical theory. It's the sucky racist, reverse racism in the name of racism and the segregation in the name of love. And it's this horrible ideology that has torn our society apart, caused the BLM riots / the BLM grift / the Patrice Cullors buying $50 billion mansions with all the money that all these
you have to
corporations
understand
gave
what
her.
it is, though.
But do you think it's actually a society reacting to a bunch of academic programming, or is it just the natural consequences of economically depressed and greedy people trying to use our positive emotions against us?
It's both.
Okay.
So what the way that these ideas permeate into society is they like your average person has influencers that influence them. These are your school teacher, your pastor, your parents, the music and media that you consume.
Yeah, totally.
I'll call it the influencer class. But who's above them? Where are they getting their ideas from? Most of the people in the influencer class nowadays, in the past 40 or 50 years, have all passed through the academic system. And they, in that academic system, began to interact with academics. And those academics deeply instilled in them what was sort of higher level of thought. Like this is what the smart people think, right?
Okay, cool.
And then but the thing is, you have to go, well, who were the academics reading? Like, who is influencing the academics? And what you find is that there are key intellectual figures in intellectual history that have influenced the movement. Now,
Satan.
And I'll show you right now where it came from, where the woke came from. I have something in the Discord that I sent you.
Oh, okay.
It has a thing with activist academics in it that you might want to pull up.
Oh, okay, cool. Like Dan McClellan? I know you're always talking about him.
Well, I think he is following in this tradition. It's not Max Horkheimer. We'll get to him in a minute.
Okay.
That's the one right there, I think, right there.
This one right here?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's it.
Okay, I'll pull it up.
So what happens is that you have the Frankfurt School neo-Marxists who have a particular view. If you want to throw that on the screen. So if you have these neo-Marxists from the Frankfurt School that have this idea of critical theory, and that the entire world is essentially best summed up as this power dynamic structures between groups, right? And then the thing is that and then you have the postmodernists. So this is Foucault, this is Derrida. These are people who have sort of the idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth. It's all about language. And so what happens is there's kind of this is where Jordan Peterson talks about is, the postmodern neo-Marxist types. What he's talking about are these activist professors, these activist academics that are in that diagram. These are people like Judith Butler, Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi, Howard Zinn, Kimberly Crenshaw.
Okay.
These academics, the question was, who are they reading? Where did they come up with their ideas? Their ideas are traceable back to the neo-Marxists and postmodernists, like directly. And the thing is that if you go to your average professors today, even at BYU, you hear them talking about DiAngelo and Kendi and Zinn and Judith Butler, and they're actually citing these people. So there is an intellectual heritage, and there is a common philosophy that these people are propagating and moving forward. And what it's all rooted in ultimately, it's all rooted in a neo-Marxist, postmodernist way of looking at the world. Marx saw the world in terms of power dynamics, but he only looked at it through economics. He was looking at the economic power dynamics. What the neo-Marxists did, in actually a very smart and interesting move, was they said, we're not just going to analyze economic power, we're going to analyze all aspects of power. And I don't mean just political power. I mean, like, you have more power if you're a man because you're physically stronger.
And the patriarchy.
That radical feminism pulled their ideas directly from this. They began to look at power in terms of gender, the way that gender interacts with power dynamics in society. And so you begin to look at the world through this lens of a class struggle or a power struggle between groups. And so what these people breed, just like the Marxists were about fomenting revolution, the activist academics foment the idea that we are going to create activism to deconstruct the institutions of Western society because they are inherently oppressive.
So I was just talking with my father today, all right, and he runs a business, and he's starting to get hit up by a bunch of young kids now that all of a sudden are asking for jobs, and this is generally blue-collar work. And what's so interesting is for the first 10 years of our company, it was much more difficult to get young kids, especially in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which has very neoliberal ideas that are left over from the Reagan administration and the Clinton administration and stuff like that. It was very hard to get kids to want to come and work in something that's blue collar without having a college degree first and being in college or trying to get their master's or something, because there was this overwhelming stigma on people that did not go to college. Like, you were stupid if you didn't graduate from college. And the only reason why all of these people that we just put on the screen have had such an influence on our society is because we have 3 generations of kids now that were told, go to college in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, or you are stupid. And working with your hands and learning the actual realities of life. Oh, no, that's for the immigrants. No, that's for the stupid kids that couldn't graduate from college. Oh, no, that's for the criminals over there that need a job placement program. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's the whole arrogance and soft bigotry of low expectations, and really the arrogance of the academic elite. And that's why college ballooned in price. All the millennials are so indebted they can't afford housing, and so many of our economic problems are caused by that now. But what I've noticed is there is hope. I feel like everything you've said in the history lesson so far is true, but the reason why I think there's hope is because young kids are disinterested in college. No one young is listening to all these people. You want to know why? Because their parents were the psychopaths marching in this little rally that you see on the right, that while in debt $250K because of a German psychological philosophy of linguistics major, couldn't get him anything but a job at Starbucks, you know what I'm saying? And they have to work that just to pay off the minimum payment that they can't get out of ever. Their parents, just like the divorce epidemic of the 80s and the early 90s, scared a lot of people off of the idea of marriage. The student loan crisis, of millennials has scared a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha off of the idea of going to college. Okay. And so I think there's hope, because with less kids going to college and entering the real world faster, these academic ideas, just like Bill Maher says, all of these bad ideas, they come from academia. So I think there's less of an interest in academia, and there's going to be a rebirth of reason.
I think there's an extent to which you might be right, where we are finally at the beginnings of kind of going, wait a minute, these people coming out of college are coming out crazy. And the idea is, obviously, it's not like in all institutions of the academy. There's still aspects of the academy that are still rock solid. But there are, within the social sciences specifically, within history, sociology, psychology, the softer sciences is where you find these ideologies are still rampant. And they're even rampant in places like the BYU schools, which, what's his name? Greg from Quick Media does an excellent job.
He's going to town on those cats.
And he's basically exposing, hey guys, look, he's basically talking about what I'm talking about in this exact, episode. He's hammering in on where these ideas are coming from and why they're inconsistent with the gospel. Now, one thing I think we should look at real quick, if you want to pull it up in the Discord.
Okay.
There's a quote by Max Horkheimer. He is one of the
that sounds like a very ugly individual. I'm sorry, I don't want to name shame. I don't want to name shame, but that sounds just like a dude who is not attractive. And there we are. I was right.
Well,
okay, just keep going.
Well, Max Horkheimer, he was one of the Frankfurt School.
Dude, this is just like the Jordan Peterson quote. Look, the revolution won't happen with guns.
Listen to what he says. Yeah, read it.
It will. The revolution won't happen with guns. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. That is literally what Jordan Peterson said on Joe Rogan, where he said, "If I was a smart man," I can't do his accent. It becomes like a 1930s radio host. That was horrible. You know what I'm saying? Jordan Peterson, you do a much better job. So Jordan Peterson, if I were smart and I don't know, socialist, he said, if I were a smart socialist, that I would just push, and I would just push a little bit until people got irritated, and then I would come back for a little bit, and then I would push, and then I would push until they got irritated, and then come back a little bit. So here he's literally parodying in 2023 what this cat said in, oh gosh, when was this, bro?
I'm not 100% sure when it was. I'm guessing probably 50s, 60s, maybe.
Wow.
I think that's when he was big. So you have to remember that these Marxists are they're about the revolution. Let's actually pull it up. I want to read it real quick.
Okay, hit it.
He says, that this revolution is going to happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism. In other words, equity is the word that we use now. He's talking the exact same language that you hear from the radicals today. Now, I want to point something out. If you were to go to your average Catholic, they don't know much about Thomas Aquinas's proofs of God.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? But there's a difference between a practitioner, a pastor, and a theologian, right? The guys that we're talking about Max Horkheimer, when we're talking about Foucault, when we're talking about Gramsci, Marx, we're talking about the theologians. We're talking about the deepest thinkers within these movements. But the thing is, there are people that read them and then go to your average college student and begin to preach the gospel of these people to those students.
Yeah.
And they become the practitioners. Now, they don't understand what they're doing. They're just thinking, we got to equity, that's a good thing. Like, we want everybody to be equal, right? And they don't understand the ideology that they're actually a part of. And what they're actually trying to do is to rip apart the existing institutions of Western society. And these people are not unbiased. They literally have an agenda to start a revolution.
Wow. So do you really think these modern woke schools are trying to start a revolution? Or do you think they're just angry and they're getting back? Your average
woke school? No, they don't know any. They're like your average Catholic. Like, they don't understand much about the depths of the doctrines that they're a part of. Even an average Latter-day Saint, I could say, for that matter. But they are seduced by the slogans of the people. There are people who actually understand the vision of this. If you look at an Ibram X. Kendi, a Robin DiAngelo, Kimberly Crenshaw, and you go talk to those, go read them. Go read what those people say, and you'll see, holy crap, these people are nuts, and they are fully religiously invested in this movement.
Okay, so I think you've effectively proven that Benson was right about the communists. Okay, so I think you were right. They infiltrated the system, and then instead of being economic communists, they became cultural communists. Now, here's the big question.
Let's call them cultural Marxists.
Cultural Marxists.
Because communism is a little bit more narrow.
Okay, cool. So now what do we do as Latter-day Saints to fight the cultural Marxism? That's the question. You've established that Benson was right, that, okay, everybody said that he was being alarmist. Everybody said that he was speaking hyperbolically about all the communists in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But he was right. These people literally said we're going to have to take over the institutions incrementally, year by year. He was right. There were actual communists that said, okay, socialism needs to be the religion that replaces Christianity. And, they got away with a lot of it. Okay, but they didn't get away with all of it. So how do we fight back as members of the church?
You directly confront it and contrast it with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Oh, interesting. May I suggest a children's book I read?
What's that?
Actually, it's kind of funny. While I was digging up that book, while I was digging up the socialism, the Red Carpet by Ezra Taft Benson, Socialism, the Royal Road to Communism. And on the bottom half of good old Russell M. Nelson, done by the Korean street artist, you know what I'm saying? I actually had the other copy, and I pulled it up, this book, Sheeple. Have you read it?
I have not.
Dude, we got 3 copies, and I'm kind of, I guess I'm ruining it here a little bit, because I got 3 copies for Kwaku Brad and myself to read. But Ed and I were the only ones that read it. Ed, what did you think of this book? I'm going to read this to the class really fast. Did you like it?
Yes, I did. I read Kwaku's copy, and I enjoyed it very much. It reminded me a lot of Lieutenant Colonel Grossman's Sheepdog book, but for a slightly younger audience. And I think it's the perfect book for the preteen to learn about good and bad, good and evil in the world.
All right, so check this out. I'm just going to burn through this book super fast, and we're going to do it like kiddie style so you can see all the pictures. Look at that. Hey, my studio is perfect for reading books at home. Isn't that just like adorable? Okay, but so check this out. You may not get to see every picture, but I'm going to burn through this really fast. 3 colorful sheep lived in a peaceful prairie. Their names were Mary, Gary, and of course, Harry. They were all friends with one another, although they each were of a different color, green, blue, and even red. They played together till it was time for bed. Okay, so we got a bunch of different colored sheep. Mary, Gary, and Harry were all protected by their guard dogs, whom all sheeple respected. And look, you can see there's all their different guard dogs right there. So every sheep has its own guard dog. Their loyal dogs kept a watchful eye for the hungry wolf who lived nearby. This is super Dr. Seussy. I'm digging it. Right? Then one day there appeared a stranger. It was a new sheep who warned of danger. He said, Gary's dog is dangerous and mean, and Gary can't have one because he's green. And there's the sheep right there. Okay. Looks a little bit suspicious, that sheep. It looks almost like that wolf in the previous page. But, you know, hey, I'm not suggesting anything here, right? So anyway, Mary and Harry didn't stand up for Gary because they thought his dog was kind of scary. So Gary's dog was put in a box where he could not escape because of the locks. So the first guard dog of the first sheep was put in a box. Kind of like you were talking about earlier in our interview with April Disdain, where you just said, hey, you know, you can't be putting people that are fighting for the truth in a box because of minor technicalities of suburban niceness versus kindness, right? So anyway, the stranger didn't stop there. Look at this stranger. Looks kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing to me. But anyway, the stranger didn't stop there. Again, he told them to beware. Mary's dog will bite you, he said. Besides, Mary can't have one because she's red. Harry didn't help because he was blue, and he didn't want his dog taken too. How many times when you ask members of the church to help out with X, Y, or Z, even nominal cause, like to save the courthouse in Back to the Future or something, right? They're like, oh, well, I don't know. I've got customers. If they see that I donated to X, Y, or Z thing, I don't know what they'd say or whatever, you know? So anyway, so Mary's dog was taken away, never to be seen again to this day. The stranger proclaimed one last time having a dog was now a crime. Harry was sad and gave an urgent plea, pretty please, will someone help me? Because he lacked courage to help a friend, nobody stood up for Harry in the end. So now all the sheep dogs that are protecting the sheep, they've all been taken away. So when the last dog disappeared, something happened that they feared. They received a big surprise when a wolf appeared before their eyes. And boom, what do you know? The wolf was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Reminds me almost like...
Is the wolf named Patrice...
Patrice Cullors?
Patrice Cullors?
You know,
is that her name?
I was thinking of Donald Trump when he said, you were a snake. You knew I was a snake when you let me in. Do you remember that? My impressions today are not very good at all.
They're okay.
Really
they're
bad.
B minus.
They're C minus.
Having a bad midnight.
Yeah, it's a bad midnight. But anyway, the wolf was hungry and only getting thinner, so he ate Mary, Gary, and Harry for dinner. Is this the end of Mary, Gary, and Harry? Now, what's interesting is I haven't read this far yet, so we're blazing a trail right now. You know what I'm saying? We're blazing a trail right now.
That's where it's going to go.
So don't worry, you can still intervene with this magical time machine. Okay, so I asked you, how do you stop these woke scolds that are a bunch of wolves in sheep's clothing, that are people that are literally trying to transform socialism as the religion that replaces Christianity and actually inject all of these bad and cruel ideas that tear our social fabric in order to incrementally and, generation by generation, literally destroy our society by a socialist take, or a culturally Marxist, as you call it, takeover. So how do we go back in a time machine and stop these people? The Derridas, the Foucaults that you speak about. Okay. Don't worry, you can still intervene with this magical time machine. Scan your hand and go back in time so you can stop this awful crime. Right there. I'm scanning.
Bzzzt.
Buzz. Yeah, you do really good Foley sound. At which point we all whoosh. All right, whoosh, we go back in time. And I'm really curious to see what this author says because I didn't get this far. So anyway, he says, you did it. You traveled back in time. Now here's your chance to go stop that crime. Tell the sheep what you know to be true, to stand up for each other, whether they're red, green, or blue. Okay, so this is kind of like, hippie 90s. Like, it don't matter if you're black or white. Or in this case, that impression was much better.
In other words, you don't divide the world into identity groups and then pit them against one another in a power struggle.
Dude, I'm digging. And you defend others when they're getting taken advantage of as well, which I feel we do in this show. So speak up, they can all hear you, he says. Oh, this is pretty good. Then one day there appeared a stranger. It was the false sheep who warned of danger. He said, Gary's dog is dangerous and mean, and Gary can't have one because he's green. We've all heard that before. Mm-hmm. The toxic patriarchy, got to get rid of those toxic males. You can keep your regular males, but any of them that display toxic stereotypes need to go. And by the way, toxic masculinity is just masculinity. So they got rid of all the masculine men, right? You know what I'm saying? So you're the one that actually said, describe to me what's not toxic masculinity without using feminine adjectives.
Yeah, like describe healthy. I always like to ask people this, the audience, you guys can listen and do this to people. Say, describe to me healthy masculinity, but do it without using feminine terms.
Okay, yeah. So let's see if the sheeple, thumbnail. Let's see if the sheeple can actually I'm going to see if I can find this in that thumbnail. You know what I'm saying? ×2. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, freeze frame. So anyway, okay. This time Mary and Harry did intervene. They stood up for Gary because he's green. They said, although we're different from each other, we will love and defend one another. Good Mormons, The wolf became angry and yelled at the sheep. And that's when they finally recognized that creep. Oh, that's funny. He used the word creep. They said, we won't let you take our dogs by consensus. Oh, this is just no longer a children's book. They're using some big words here. They said, we won't let you take our dogs by consensus so you can eat us when we're all left defenseless. And they're fighting back. Oh my gosh. This book, it's a children's book that is actually advocating fighting back. This is a first in my lifetime. So the guard dogs protected Mary, Gary, and Harry as they chased the wolf clear off the prairie. Now we know our freedom and liberty are only protected when our love for each other is truly perfected. Oh, that is cute. Tell all the people about sheeple. Share this book with friends and family. Okay, so do you think sheeple nailed it?
I think they did.
Do we? Wow. Okay.
I think the whole point of this is that what you do is you don't divide people into identity groups. That's the whole purpose of what the gospel talks about. It says, look, we are all one and we are all equal before God. And no, you don't get special privileges and you don't get less privileges. You don't get special treatment when you go to college to correct for historical injustices. We all have an equal opportunity. The thing is that
yeah, do we get reparations for literally having the mob launch mortars onto Nauvoo and to murder people that were fleeing by shooting them in the back? Okay. The Trail of Tears, do they get... actually, there's a couple that I think we need to give back.
No, well, here's
for example, we need to give the Indian senator his due. The U.S. government promised the Indian tribes a senator in Congress, never gave it to him.
Here's the thing, okay?
40 acres a mule, we could do that.
I am all for equality of opportunity. I am not for forced equality of outcome where we violate certain people's rights. Ibram X. Kendi talks about
but the Jesus and the social gospel advocated for that, bro.
Oh my gosh.
I need to take away your sheep. Your sheepdog needs to go. It's a racist sheepdog that's bigoted and hateful and part of patriarchy. No, so anyway, keep going.
The whole idea here, though, with equal opportunity that people get is different than forced equality of outcome, because the only way you can get equal outcomes amongst all different people is to actually violate the rights of other people, right? You have to actually, you can't let people just freely compete in the marketplace and in society. You have to, as Ibram X. Kendi explicitly says in his book, that the only way to basically fix past discrimination is with current discrimination. In other words, we have to discriminate against white people to correct for the past mistakes. It's sort of like, I get to violate your rights because of things that people that shared your skin tone did in the past. It's insane, but it's taken seriously because these people...
It ends up becoming the old covenant of an eye for an eye, and the whole world goes blind because you can never go back far enough in time in order to undo all the past just injustices.
It is the bastardization of Zion. The impulse that these people have is actually a righteous impulse. It's an impulse towards Zion, which is where there are no more poor among us, where we all live in unity and love with one another. That is the right impulse to have. But here's the problem. Zion emerges from people who make and keep covenants with Christ.
So fight the commies by keeping your covenants with Christ.
Wow, that was good. I will say, when you understand that Zion emerges...
And manufacturing large nuclear warheads. That is just helpful as a backup plan. But
so Zion emerges, communism is constructed. It is something that what they're trying to do is they're trying to construct Zion by using the force of the state, by using the violent tools of state and coercion. They're saying, we're going to make Zion by telling people what they have to do according to the law. The gospel says, wrong answer. The answer is, if you all will come unto Christ and love him and do as he did, Zion will emerge as a natural consequence. And we can, as Latter-day Saints, we've seen it. We can be closer or farther from Zion. And it all is dependent. How much Zion emerges in our families, in our wards, in whatever, in our nations, is all dependent on how closely we as a people, individually and collectively, align with Christ. The farther we disengage from him, the more you're going to see conflict, and the more you're going to see people trying to use force to make the society what they want it to be.
All right, so that wasn't so bad. Benson was right about the commies, was not such a bad... I thought that was going to be a lot worse. I'll be honest with you. And we got to read the book Sheeple. You know what I'm saying? So anyway,
Nice.
Tell us where we go wrong. This has been real and it's been fun. Keep it going in the comments. Like this video before you go. This is Midnight Strike Through Mormons. We'll see you guys in the next program. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out with us all the way to the end of the video. If you haven't had a chance yet, please like it. If you haven't had a chance yet, please subscribe or click on the alert bell so you receive an alert for all of our videos. And if you haven't had a chance yet and you've got children in your family, please consider checking out our sponsor's book, Sheeple. It's a children's book written by Royal Ragsdale, one of our viewers, that teaches your kids how to stand up for their faith, how to stand up for their values, how to stand up for their friends in the face of adversity so they don't become one of the sheeple. It's super cute, super affordable, and super fun. It's also available on Amazon for an affordable price, and the link will be in the description below. Please check it out. Tell them that Cardin sent you, and check us out on midnightmormons.com. Also, if you'd like, we have a little bit more content. There should be a video right about here and another video right about here. Check those out as well. This is Midnight Strike Through Mormons. We'll see you guys in the next video.